Hello, this is from my Substack Wisdom in Progress, and it's called I Thought I Was a Solitary Oak, I Was Wrong. What aspen trees taught me about strength, survival, and the root systems we can't see. I used to think I was an oak tree, strong, solitary, deep-rooted in my own individual soil. When divorce came, when cancer came, when my business was challenged during COVID, I dug deeper into myself, alone. I'd weathered storms before. I knew how to stand firm, how to bend without breaking, how to survive through sheer individual will. Despite loving family and friends, I believe the real work of life happened in isolation. The hero's journey, as I understood it, was singular. You go into the dark forest alone. You face your demons alone. You emerge transformed alone. Then I learned about aspen trees, and everything I believed about strength changed. It happened during a hike in Park City, Utah, where golden aspens shimmer against impossibly blue skies each September. I'd always loved those trees, thousands of white trunks rising independently from the forest floor, each one standing separate and distinct against the mountain backdrop. Except they weren't. According to the National Forest Foundation, what looks like a stand of individual aspen trees is actually a single organism. One tree, many trunks. The real tree, the actual living entity, exists almost entirely underground in a massive interconnected root system that can lie dormant for years, waiting for the right condition to send up new growth. In a single stand, each trunk is a genetic replica of the others. They're not individuals, they're a community. And their strength comes not from standing alone, but from being inextricably connected beneath the surface. One aspen grove in Utah, called Pando, the trembling giant, is considered the largest living organism on Earth. 47,000 trunks, one root system, 80,000 years old. I'm 60 years old, and I'm learning I got it backward. The myth of the solitary tree. For most of my adult life, I subscribed to what I'll call the oak tree myth. The belief that strength means standing alone, that resilience comes from individual rootedness, that maturity means needing less from others. This myth worked for me, or seemed to. I built a business, provided for my family, navigated challenges with determination and grit. When people asked how I managed during difficult times, I'd smile and say something about inner strength, about digging deep, about perseverance. What I didn't say, what I couldn't see, was how exhausting it was to stand alone, how brittle I'd become, how the storms were actually winning even as I remained upright. Richard Rohr writes about the first half of life tasks: building an identity, establishing ourselves, creating a container strong enough to hold us. These are oak tree tasks, individual, upward, visible. We're supposed to do them. But Rohr also teaches that the second half of life requires something different: a necessary falling, a descent, a discovery that the individual self we worked so hard to construct is both real and insufficient. That transformation requires, as he puts it, falling upward. I didn't understand this during my own falling, during what Bruce Feiler calls the life quakes, those seismic life events that crack open our carefully constructed identities. Divorce, cancer diagnosis, career challenges. Each one felt like a storm I had to weather alone, another test of my individual oak tree strength. But here's what I couldn't see while it was happening. I wasn't actually standing alone. I just wasn't letting myself feel the roots. The underground reality. Aspens aren't the only trees with interconnected root systems. Redwoods, those giants of the California coast that can live for thousands of years and grow to 380 feet tall, have surprisingly shallow roots, rarely more than 10 feet deep. So how do they survive? How do they not topple in the first strong wind? Well, their roots spread horizontally, interweaving with the roots of every other redwood nearby. They literally hold each other up. Remove the surrounding trees, and a redwood that stood for centuries will fall. The banyan tree does something even more remarkable. Its branches send down aerial roots that eventually touch the ground and become new trunks. What looks like a forest is actually one tree that's learned to multiply itself through connection. The more it reaches out, the more it grows down. The more it grows down, the more it can reach out. During an intensive at the Modern Elder Academy, we explored the tree as a metaphor for the second half of life. Not the oak tree of solitary strength, but the aspen, redwood, banyan model of interconnected growth. Roots, our foundation, values, communities, and the relationships that hold us. Trunk, our lived experience, our growth through challenges, our learning. Branches, how we reach into the world, how we serve, how we extend ourselves. And fruit, what we give back, what creates regeneration, what nourishes others. The exercise asked us to map our lives onto this framework. Where were my roots? I'd spent decades strengthening my trunk, building experience, weathering storms, growing taller. I'd extended branches, career, family, service. I'd even tried to bear fruit. But roots, those I'd neglected, or more accurately, those I'd taken for granted. Carl Jung wrote that the meaning of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But I'd been avoiding the chemical reaction, trying to remain unchanged, trying to survive transformation rather than surrender to it. The truth I couldn't admit, I was terrified of depending on others, of being held up by someone else's root system, of discovering that my oak tree identity was a myth and my real strength lay underground, in places I couldn't see or control. The transformation equation. Looking back now, I can see the pattern of how change actually happens. Not through my solitary oak tree strength, but through a process I couldn't have engineered alone. Acknowledging the myth, plus accepting our interconnection, plus allowing ourselves to be held, equals resilient growth. Acknowledging the myth meant admitting that my self-sufficiency story wasn't just incomplete, it was damaging. That weathering storms alone actually meant isolating in my pain. That my oak tree identity kept me upright, but brittle, standing, but slowly dying. Accepting our interconnection means recognizing the root systems that are already there, family who kept showing up despite my emotional distance, friends who refused to let me disappear, communities who held space for my falling apart. Like aspens, we don't create these root systems through willpower. We discover them. We acknowledge they've been there all along. Allowing ourselves to be held was the hardest part. It required vulnerability I'd spent decades avoiding. It meant admitting I couldn't do it alone, couldn't survive alone, couldn't transform alone. It meant letting my roots interweave with others' roots, trusting that being held wouldn't make me weaker, but would actually make me more resilient. Growing down to grow up. I still love trees. I still journal about them, sketch them, photograph them, touch their bark on hikes, but I see them differently now. The black walnut in my front yard. I used to admire its solitary grandeur. Now I notice how its roots spread beneath the lawn, how it shares nutrients through underground fungal networks with the oak 30 feet away, how even its toxins, which kill some plants near it, create space for other species that thrive in its presence. I'm learning that maturity in the second half of life doesn't mean needing less. It means needing differently. Not the dependence of childhood, but the interdependence of wisdom. Not the isolation of false self, but the vulnerability of real connection. The Aspen teaches us something. The Aspen teaches us something Christianity has always known, but we keep forgetting. We are many members, one body. Individual and communal. Separate trunks, shared roots. The mystery that we're most ourselves when we're most connected. I wrote a short poem after the MEA intensive. The deeper the roots, the higher the branches, the more plentiful the fruits. Not as catchy as I'd hoped, but more true than I wanted to admit. Your root system. So I'm curious about your own root systems. When do you think about the storms you've weathered, or are weathering now? Are you trying to stand alone like an oak, or are you letting your roots interweave with others' roots like an aspen? What would it mean to grow down as intentionally as you've grown up? To extend your root system as deliberately as you've extended your branches? And if you've discovered that you've been held all along by underground connections you couldn't see, by root systems that were there before you knew you needed them, how would that change the story you tell yourself about survival? The aspens don't choose their interconnection. They simply discover what's already true. They're already one organism. The individual trunks are an illusion, the shared roots are the reality. Maybe the same is true for us. May you have gratitude, may you have forgiveness, may you have love.